The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 11:11 Hammer Deity. Lex and Luther walked up to the dwarf and laid eyes on the sword. Its blade was a little more slender than normal swords, being only 1.5 inches wide even at the base where it was widest, with a length of 42 inches 106 centimeters. But even this was just a vague shape of the sword, as it had not taken its final form yet. The handle still needed to be added, which would be Lex's bone. Since his right arm was already half burnt, he decided to just use his hand and half his forearm for the handle. "Have you brought the final ingredients?" Oren asked, without stopping his hammering. He was not giving the sword shape, but beating its spirit into shape, because of course a sword of this caliber would give birth to a spirit of its own. "Yes," Lex said. "You'll need to take a step back and hide behind my body when I reveal the flame, or you might not make it." Oren snorted, but he was too fatigued to argue. He did not believe a flame existed that dwarves could not harness. "Prepare yourself, then. After my third hammer, I'll move aside, and you connect the final two pieces." Lex nodded, and looked towards Luther, who was also prepared. As soon as Oren pulled back, giving Lex space, Luther opened up his hands, revealing the flame. Before the dragon fire could burn down the forge where his sword was being made, Lex grabbed the flames, then using the same hand, clamped the base of the sword's blade. The metal immediately began to melt, and Lex's hand became welded to the sword, though fortunately that was always the plan. Using his sword intent, Lex cut his right arm, leaving half his forearm attached to the sword. For a very brief time the heat of the dragon fire was trapped within Lex's hand as well as the melting blade of the sword. But unless it was properly tempered, the sword would be destroyed and the flames lost. "I strike." Another bolt of lightning struck the blade, as is tempering it. "I strike." One more, and this time the bolt contained so much power that even Lex and Luther were pushed back by the aura alone. But by the third strike, the sword had changed, and began to float in the air, under the holy light that Oren exuded. Its appearance was rapidly changing, and Lex could feel that an aura of its own began to develop in the sword. But the process wasn't over yet. The blade was still red hot, not only from the lightning, but from the dragon fire as well. It needed to be quenched. As if on cue, the clouds above them broke into rain, but it wasn't water that the clouds were giving out. Instead it was pure, liquid spiritual essence. Oren's figure disappeared from the sky and the dwarf reappeared in front of Lex, kneeling in exhaustion and weakness. Even though he was the first dwarf, and even though he was a deity, he had been weakened extensively over the years. Lex reached to help him up, but he quickly waved him away. "Forget me, you fool. Clasp your sword and give it a name, quick, before it takes a name of its own." Urged on by Oren, Lex nodded and then walked towards the floating sword, its aura rapidly evolving. The sword tried to resist Lex as he reached for it, but how could anything stop him? Lex grabbed the handle of the sword, which fortunately no longer looked like his hand, with his left hand, and felt something connect the sword to his soul. But the bond was still weak. To strengthen the bond, he would need to name the sword. Crap, Lex thought to himself as he tried to think of cool names. Why did this seem so much more intimidating than facing death? Chapter 11:12 Naraka. If Lex had known he'd be put on the spot like this, he would have never made the sword to begin with. Or maybe, he would have just spent some time thinking of a name. Should he use a pun involving his name? The lexicon? No, that was dumb. Should he fuse his and Oren's name to pay tribute to the swordmaker? Lauren? Oryx? Still pretty meh. Butter Knife 2.0? It was tempting, but the sword deserved a serious name that sounded cool and intimidating at the same time. Time seemed to slow down as thousands of names went through Lex's mind, but the more he thought about it, the worse his ideas became. Although, admittedly, that was because Lex kept thinking of different renditions of the lexicon. Once he was truly convinced that he could not give his sword a name based on a pun, he thought of a name seriously for a moment. Since he had somewhat reluctantly admitted that he had anger issues, sometimes, and whenever he faced a foe, he didn't just want to defeat them, he wanted to punish them, Lex decided to name his sword after Hell. But calling his sword Hell did not sound right. In that case, he decided to name his sword Naraka, which was hell in Buddhism from back on Earth. As soon as he decided on the name, he felt the connection between him and the sword strengthen. The aura of the sword finally stopped changing, and the persona of the sword was finally formed. It gave off the incredible heat of dragon fire, and radiated the wrath of hell. It was a weapon to punish and torture his enemies, and lay waste to any who stood in his way. It was a little extreme, to be honest. Lex was a peaceful guy. He never picked fights. In fact, when others picked fights with him, he did his best to end those fights as quickly as possible. But since he had a sword now, he might as well keep it. Lex channeled his sword intent into the sword, and the silver sword began to give off a white light, which made sense since his sword intent had become visible as of late. "It's incredible," whispered Lex, looking towards the exhausted Orin. "The first kill of this sword needs to be worthy of the blade," Orin said, as he slowly picked himself up. "If you get an unworthy kill as its first, then it's bad luck." Lex frowned. Where was he going to find a worthy kill? It wasn't like he kept a bunch of enemies in the basement so that he could kill them whenever he wanted. "Searching for such an enemy will be a hassle," Lex said. "Holy shoot, a shoot of a vine that grows grapes filled with divine energy." He sent the vine to the turtle. He could see that it had a lot of potential, and not just to make amazing wine. Divine energy was actually not easy to accumulate, so having a fruit full of it was amazing. But for now he had to heal his arm and then return to the origin realm after 15 whole years. He actually felt a little excited about it. "Hey Lex, before you leave the inn, don't forget to look at the refugees from Earth." "Ugh, they're fine. I am not going back there." "Hey, just because they made a few bad movies about the Innkeeper does not mean." "A few bad movies, Mary?" "They wrote fanfiction novels about the Innworkers falling in love with each other. They wrote the masked tyrant's backstory being that he was actually shy, which is why he wears masks. They made a movie about how Harry is actually Cupid just because he's a glamour sorcerer. They. Alright, you're just upset because last year you won the title of Forever Alone in their annual genocide survival party. God damn it, I've had a girlfriend before. Besides, this body is 15 years old. It's not exactly appropriate for me to date right now." Hey, you don't have to explain anything to me. I believe you. But you still have to check up on them. They've been requesting help again. It might be another monster in their realm. Tell Z to go check it out. Since they love him so much, he can do it. Are you jealous that he got a monument? Lex snorted. He was not jealous. Chapter 11:13 Only one choice. Lex grumbled as he walked towards the ORR. He had a stump instead of a hand. The origin realm was waiting for him to return to. There was some critical mission waiting for him on some utopia planet. He didn't have time to be babysitting a few Earthlings. Just because they had rapidly grown in technology, civilization, and cultivation without massive corporations bottleneck progress for personal gain, they all thought they were so amazing. Who even cared that in a mere 15 years they had surpassed human civilization back on Earth? Or used science to explain cultivation? Or created a machine that used dumb AI, meaning AI that won't gain a soul, as well as the Midnight Inn's massive catalog of techniques to create a machine that analyzes humans and designs a cultivation technique and method suited specifically for them? Lex certainly didn't. Lex snorted once more. How dare they make a video game about the Midnight Inn and keep him as an unlockable side character? Mary, spread the word, Lex said as he went to get his arm fixed. In exactly 12 hours, the Midnight Inn will be opening back up. To commemorate our reopening, there is going to be an event, and after that we will be kicking off the Midnight Games once more. But the games are going to be a little different this time. Instead of worlds, participants will be individuals and represent only themselves, or a small group. Any details on what the event will be? Mary asked. Oddly enough, this was the first time Lex had mentioned something like this. Discover new stories at novelhall.com. No. The workers all just need to know that we will be expecting a sudden influx of new guests. I will try to keep the numbers low for now though. It would be great if Lex could just open up the system, do the task in Utopia, and then lock it back down. The Midnight Realm had more than everything he needed to grow, and now with the inn being able to support tribulations once more, he could easily stay here until he became an immortal. Honestly, he had grown too fond of the inn and everyone in it, so he wasn't willing to give up. That left only one viable option: become stronger than any other foe out there who might seek to challenge him. And wasn't that essentially the same thing as becoming the best? To that end, he had been doing a lot of research these past few years. He talked to his idiotic system and forced it to give him quest rewards in the form of knowledge that he had hidden deep within the Midnight Library. That knowledge basically only pertained to one thing: how to become the best. Whether it was fortunate or unfortunate, on such a path, Lex needed to be proactive. He could no longer wait for prizes to fall into his lap, or wait to encounter good luck. He already had possibly the best cultivation technique in existence, so now he just needed to make use of it in the best way. So, after much research, he had discovered the best conditions and circumstances under which he should become an immortal, and for that, he had to return to the Origin Realm. Not only did he need to return, he was on a time limit. His growth in the nascent realm was much quicker than anticipated, and Lex actually had to put seals on his own body to prevent himself from automatically growing into the next level. But those seals had now begun to fail. Lex had a matter of months to arrange everything. So it was not just the Midnight Inn that would be returning to the Origin Realm. It would also be Lex the Dragon Slayer, and if the amount of attention his previous stunt with the dragon attracted was anything to go by, then what he had planned for his grand return would turn him into an overnight sensation. Hence the need to forge himself a proper weapon, as well as the few other preparations he had made. Chapter 11:14 Open once more. Lex played with the event panel, setting the parameters for the upcoming event. Although the event panel was already one of the most powerful and versatile panels Lex had for the entire system, it had undergone drastic improvements over the last few years. Discover new stories at novelhall.com. A rise in Lex's authority had directly contributed to that, as well as the higher functionality of the system. But if he had to be honest, the thing that most improved how much he could control the system was absorbing the amber chaos resin. There was a phenomenon that affected the whole realm when Lex absorbed it, and it improved Lex so drastically that it was fairly unbelievable. That was why he had hurried over and absorbed a second piece as well, but absorbing a second piece of resin did not produce nearly as much of a difference as the first, so instead Lex decided to collect the resin and store them for when he might need them in the future. Of course, he also had Jack absorb one as well. That left a total of 7 pieces of resin that were currently stored in Lex's museum, surrounded by countless formations designed to hide their auras. It was not just a drastic improvement in his body's strength, resilience, defense, char, potential, and many more things. It directly catapulted Lex's rank on the cosmic ascendance spectrum by a large degree. He was now fairly certain that, as an individual, his rank on that list was above most races like devils, angels, and the like. He was not sure how he compared to celestials, but Lex did notice that he could directly ignore a majority of the effect that dragons might had on him previously. With the upgrade in his rank on that list, the system was a lot more cordial to him, even though Lex could clearly tell that it did not want to be. It was a strange thing that his system was developing a personality. Perhaps this was a result of him not absorbing it into his soul. Regardless, since then, the system was a lot more flexible in the things it allowed Lex to do. 999 confused, worn, beaten living creatures suddenly appeared in the inn. Most of them were beasts, and they sustained considerable injuries which needed immediate treatment. Some were plants, others were monsters, and a few were ordinary sentient beings, while one was a 2D character who disappeared off the page of a comic book. The page in the comic where he died was empty, confusing the little human who was reading the comic. How could the last page be empty? But no one could give him an answer. Lex, who had full faith in his workers, especially now that most of them were either in the Golden Core or Nascent Realm, ventured off on his own journey. Surprisingly little was known about Yildirim Utopia, and even the item he had collected belonging to this planet had been smuggled off. If he could have personally entered the Emporium, he could have gathered information, but his projection could not leave the tavern, so he was forced to arrive here with no real knowledge of this place. His first and immediate impression of the place was that it was actually pretty nice. The weather was nice and warm, without being hot even by mortal standards, and the flora as far as he could see resembled Earth. Lex was standing on a beach, and the gentle waves ebbed and flowed, tickling Lex's toes as the water ran over them. A few seagulls flew in the sky, hunting for prey, while a number of animals randomly occupied the ground. A bale of turtles had half buried themselves in the sand, enjoying their warmth. Countless fish filled the water, even this close to the shore, revealing how rich and full the water was. Lex was expecting to feel nausea upon once more returning to the origin realm, but something about this place actually felt quite soothing. It was relaxing in a way that even the inn wasn't. How curious. Chapter 11:15 Saintish Yildirim. Around the time that Lex reopened the inn to the universe, there was a small wooden pirate ship floating in the air. There was a fairy sleeping at the helm, its feet up on the steering wheel. On the deck there was a small owl, which would from time to time rotate its head around and glare at a tiny, crystal alligator sleeping on the deck. The alligator had come out of the crystal egg Jack had rescued, and for the most part all it did was sleep. As if that was not enough, everything it touched began to turn to crystal. Jack actually had to spend several months strengthening the ship to resist the crystallization process. Sure, that ultimately made the ship stronger, but Ollie still didn't like it. But even more than the alligator, it hated the first mate. It was a unicorn that had suffered from extreme dwarfism, making it only a few inches large. Yet even if it wanted to complain it could not. The unicorn was too strong, weaker only than the captain. Moreover, its magic was absolutely terrifying. But no matter what the case was, it had skipped the order of seniority by directly becoming the first mate. Suddenly, Jack opened his eyes. "Guys, it's time. Tiny Sparkles, open the sails. Everyone else, man your stations. We're heading out." Tiny Sparkles, the unicorn, responded in a deep, reverberating voice, "For the last time, Captain, we don't need sails to travel through realms." But even as it complained, the unicorn did as it was told. Captain Jack cared a lot about looking cool, which would have made him a terrible captain if he wasn't otherwise competent in every other way as well. Jack did not respond. He was focused on the ancient, strange temple they were in. By all accounts, this thing should not have existed in the Midnight Realm. But it did, and as far as Jack could tell after years of research, it was also connected to some unknown realm that the inn had never touched upon before. This was a perfect time to begin his own journey, untouched by the system and Lex. At the same time, he could feel the call to adventure in his blood. It was risky, sure, but by now Jack was completely used to his fairy powers. He was more than confident in surviving. Energy filled the ancient pillars of the temple, activating a teleportation formation that seemed to have been formed naturally. Then, 1 second later, they were gone. Moments later the temple began to crumble, but as it did, it revealed an engraving that had long been hidden, even from Jack's inspection as well as Lex's. It disappeared before anyone could see, though if Lex had seen it, he would have recognized it as the Tower of Providence. It was the same tower that teleported him away back in the Crystal Realm, and it was the tower which worked across the entire universe, combating the powers of chaos. It was also the same tower that gave Lex the taro fertilizer, the very thing that allowed the realm seed to mature so quickly. Elsewhere, in the Origin Realm, a meeting was being convened between various members of the Henali race. Each attending member was a Dao Lord. "According to our agents, the Midnight Inn has reopened," the Henali convening the meeting said. Across the Origin and Crystal Realms, the return of the Midnight Inn suddenly sparked a great interest. Besides the vested interests of countless powerful beings, just the fact that the two realms were embroiled in war made the inn invaluable. It was the perfect retreat in a dire situation, not to mention a secure location for meetings. Even though Lex intended for his return to be gradual, Within the first few minutes there were already hundreds of thousands of guests coming to the inn. Lex himself, meanwhile, was kept abreast of all information by Mary. But he was not concerned. The inn could handle such an influx. Instead, he was more concerned about the strange environment on this planet. The more time he spent here, the more oddities he noticed. Lex's body had been improved to the utmost by 2 resins, to the extent that he had put various seals on his body restricting his power lest he burst into the immortal realm. Yet even so, Lex could detect that if he stayed in such an environment, over the course of many years, his soul would become stronger. This was something that not even the Midnight Realm could do. It could aid in improving cultivation, but improving the soul just through the environment alone was absurd. Even being in the literal soul plane could not do that. Lex began to explore the planet, walking unseen among the residents. Most of them were not too strong to begin with. The majority of the people were in the Chi training realm or foundation realm, with a few golden core cultivators seen here and there. If he entered a large city he could even spot a nascent soul cultivator, though he immediately noticed that all nascent soul cultivators, each and every one of them, was a soldier or a guard. Another peculiar thing he noticed was that this place really seemed to be a utopia. The leader of this planet, known only as Saintess Yildirim, had worked extensively to transform the planet over the last decade or so. She had done extensive civil and humanitarian work, to the point where no person needed to ever work to live a comfortable life. All the basic needs were provided. But oddly enough, providing such a situation created an environment where many people actually wanted to work, and took up many odd jobs. Farming was by far the most popular, followed by working with animals, then being a school teacher. These were the 3 most desirable jobs on the entire planet, as they provided the most fulfillment and satisfaction. But at the same time, the laws were also incredibly strict. There was no room for things like abuse, theft, and the likes. As Lex walked from town to town, from city to city, he saw a scene right out of a fairy tale. It was not that negative emotions did not exist on this planet anymore, but that everyone had been trained how to deal with and vent those emotions in a productive and healthy way. It almost seemed ridiculous. Lex began to genuinely admire this saintess, and decided that maybe he should meet her. After all, he could not find any other reason why he needed to be on this planet, so he began to search for her. That's when, for the first time since coming here, Lex sensed a hint of maliciousness. Chapter 11:16 Lex? The sensation was not originating from some specific person or place. There was just a hint of it mixed in with the general environment. It was like an unexpected, unpleasant smell in an otherwise nice place. Lex had become more sensitive to such things in the last few years while he tried to hone his powers and abilities. Since he could read people's emotions really well, it was just one step forward to sense the influence their thoughts and emotions had on their surroundings. In summary, it was a cultivator version of a vibe check. Some people, while putting up a front of being kind and amicable, were harboring dark thoughts relating to the Saintess Yildirim. It wasn't too surprising since she kept a firm check on anyone who wanted to do anything illegal. Most people took advantage of the great facilities provided and the actual utopian civilization, but some wanted other things. Some people just enjoyed hurting others. Not to mention, the utopia probably had enemies of its own. It took Lex many years to get his hands on an item from there, and in that time he had learned a few things about it. The utopia existed within the Jotun Empire, but there was almost no information on it. No one knew which power controlled the planet, not that there were many people looking for it. There was no significant import or export from the planet, and its people could not even access the Henali portal. But to be a part of the empire and remain so well hidden, some big power was definitely controlling it, and they no doubt had enemies too. So it was not surprising that there were people targeting the Saintess despite all the good she had done. But more than her hand in creating a utopia, Lex strongly suspected that she was being targeted because she knew the reason why souls were being nourished on this planet. Such a thing would spark greed in anyone's heart. Lex began to blink around the planet, searching from city to city for signs of the Saintess. She had countless palaces where she could reside in, but all of them were empty. Moreover, no one knew where she might be either. She managed to keep her whereabouts extremely private. But if Lex could find even the resin in the hidden corners of the Midnight Realm, then finding a saintess was not a real challenge. It took him only a few hours to find a trace of the saintess, at which point it was only a matter of a few more teleportations to find her. There was a massive white palace with countless spires rising into the sky. It was built on the side of a mountain with a deep lake filling the valley beside it. Doves, ducks, and geese could be seen everywhere, while wild lilies covered the entire mountains. It was as if this place specifically was the center of purity. All dirt from the world seemed to be washed away close to the palace. The air here seemed more. Lex had no words for it, but it was somehow more clear and fresh than even the air in the inn. His body right now had no impurities in it whatsoever, but he suspected if he had any, coming to this place would have removed them. The scene was too beautiful to be reality, too perfect. It was as if something like this should only exist in paintings. The only flaw, if it could be called that, was the absolute stillness of the palace. Compared to its surroundings, which were filled with an abundance of life, the palace seemed lifeless. There were no guards, no workers, no residents. He spread out his spirit sense to check the castle and finally found a few living people. She must have been wearing some extremely extraordinary equipment to be so well hidden. Another thing was strange was that the fight, however brief, happened right behind her. The assassin had even yelled out, calling him a bodyguard, but she did not move at all. It was as if she was dead. Or maybe she was just a very deep sleeper. But concluding that was too unbelievable, Lex tried to probe the situation. "Excuse me for my uninvited arrival, Saintess." I could not hold myself back when I sensed the assassins about to make a move. "I am also a big fan of your work on this planet, and was looking forward to meeting you," he said as formally and politely as he could manage. There was some movement in the hammock finally, and the Saintess replied, "Thank you for your help, although I was not in as much danger as you might have imagined. I'm always protected." The Saintess had a delicate voice, but it sounded forlorn more than anything. It was as if her protection was a topic of great remorse for her rather than providing her with a feeling of safety. Lex froze. His eyes opened wide and his jaw nearly dropped. But then suddenly a trace of doubt filled his mind. It couldn't be. "I'm glad you were safe, then. But I truly still admire what you've done on this planet. I have never seen anyone else create such a peaceful and fulfilling environment." There was a long silence, but eventually the Saintess simply replied, "Thank you." Shock filled Lex's eyes, and he suddenly teleported right in front of the Saintess, finally gazing upon her fair visage. She was a young lady of immaculate beauty, and everything about her radiated an aura of purity and simplicity. "Moon!" Lex exclaimed, recognizing his youngest sister. The Saintess flashed open her closed eyes and locked onto Lex's face. "Lex?" Chapter 11-17 Seals. Generally, Lex was able to maintain his composure regardless of the situation. In fact, more often than not, the more serious a situation was, the better he would be at controlling himself. He had to be like this, considering the fact that he regularly faced extremely powerful beings that could easily eradicate him. 4 new novels. In fact, Lex could say for certain that if the Saintess had any other identity at all, whether it be some ancient deity or a secret Tao lord or some unimaginable entity with a power scale he could not comprehend, he would still not have been shocked. But brought face to face with Little Moon, his youngest sister, thoroughly stumped him. How many years had it been since he had last seen her? Considering that he had spent 15 years in the Midnight Realm, and hadn't seen her for years even before that, it was close to 2 decades. Had it really been so long? He could not help but take in her entire appearance, and compare it to his memories. His youngest sister had, naturally, been the naughtiest and most spoiled of the siblings. She got everything she wanted and their parents were always more lenient with her. Even among the siblings, they tended to spoil her more. If Lex had to describe her in a few simple words, he would go with youthful, vibrant, energetic and mischievous. But the grown woman before Lex's eyes seemed too different, despite having the same face and voice. Even for her, it had been many years already since she last saw him. "Moon, what are you doing over here?" Lex asked, shocked. Even as he asked the question, he realized it was a stupid one, but his ordinarily very quickly brain was currently experiencing lag. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here? Last I heard, you had disappeared from Earth. No one could find you." Belle was worried sick, even if she didn't show it. Lex's emotions fluctuated as he recalled the various things his family had kept from him. Had Moon been in on it as well? He scanned her with his spirit sense and realized she was in the golden core, confirming that she must have been cultivating from a young age. But instead of being upset, Lex instead felt alarmed. He stepped closer and grabbed her thin, frail arms. He used his various senses to probe her body and discovered something that alarmed him. "Why are you so weak?" "You're even weaker than a mortal," he said, feeling genuine concern take hold. But in response, Moon only smiled weakly, her expression filled with endless hidden regrets. Before she could explain, a strange pulse of energy distracted Lex. The assassins he defeated lay unconscious still, but clearly some failsafe had been triggered. A strange crystal emerged from within their bodies and began to pulse together. "Lex, it's not that I don't want to go," Moon desperately explained, "but that I really can't leave this planet. My soul has been chained to this planet. If I move away from this planet, if I so much as even fly too high in the sky, my soul will be extinguished. The formation around this planet was not put in place just to protect me from attacks. It was put there to make sure I don't try anything that'll hurt myself." It was a painful admission, but there had been days where she really had been very desperate. She had never reached the point of wanting to commit suicide, but her grandfather wanted to take no risks, and so her safe haven also became her prison. Lex's head snapped from the spatial anomaly to Moon, and suddenly he saw things in a new light. He used his soul sense and discovered that the size of Moon's soul in her body was actually no larger than a coin. But from within that coin emerged a long, thin rope that exited from within her body and went down towards the center of the planet. "Lex, you should run." "They won't kill me, but they will kill you," Moon began to say desperately, tears beginning to fill the corner of her eyes. Her weak body began to tremble under the emotional strain, but the more it was like this, the more effort Lex had to put in to keep his anger from bubbling up. In the end, instead of saying anything, Lex smiled at her. "Hey little sis, have I ever met your real body before? Or was everything back on Earth just made up?" Moon was stunned by the question. This was not the time to dwell on such things. Even she could feel the enormous aura rising behind her. She wanted more than anything to spend time with Lex. It had been so long since she met someone in person. But the situation... Before Moon could answer, Lex reached forward and wiped the tears that were about to fall from her eyes. "Relax, little Moon. I'm here. It's going to be okay." Oh, Lex was really looking forward to beating the living hell out of someone right now. Fortunately, there was a volunteer coming towards him just in time. Lex tore his shirt and revealed 3 seals on his chest that kept his cultivation under control. The middle one looked like a piece of jewelry that was embedded right into his chest. It was something he made on his own, and it was responsible for containing most of his power sealed. The other 2, however, consisted of a glyph that was embedded into his skin, and a tattoo that looked like a tiny lotus. Lex did not want to undo too many of his seals because it would cause hiccups in his plans, but when circumstances did not allow it, there was no point in dwelling on these things. The glyph disappeared from his skin, and the lotus began to fade. Lex's aura did not explode, because as long as the 3rd seal wasn't undone he could still decently control his power. But to face an immortal, 2 seals should be more than enough. Probably. He'd never tried before, so he could only find out now. Chapter 11:18 Give me names. Why were immortals so much more powerful than mortals? It was not just because it was, obviously, a higher realm in cultivation. Immortals were a higher form of existence. For someone following the normal route of progressing, reaching the nascent realm made them barely strong enough to just detect the laws of the universe vaguely. It was mere detection, not interaction or manipulation. It was, instead, when they became immortals that their bodies and souls would be strengthened enough to tolerate the burden of touching upon laws, and their tenets could act as anchors to keep them from being swept away when they touched the laws in any way. So, in essence, their base strength came from the fact that they had to be strong enough for their body to not fall apart under the burden of laws, while the limits of their individual power came from how much or how deeply they could influence those laws. That was also why tenets were so important. They directly impacted how an immortal not only perceived laws, but how they interacted with them. For an ordinary person, that was not a simple divide to cross. For Lex, it was something he had been doing for years already. A part of him wondered if he should take this opportunity to whet his sword as well, but then decided against it. Lex watched as a portal opened and an earth immortal walked out of it. Unlike the realms before it, which were divided into early, middle, late and peak, the immortal realms were divided into 9 sub-levels, though he did not yet understand the significance of those levels. Either way, this immortal who suddenly arrived seemed like he was close to the beginning of the immortal realm. Heck, even Kawain and Lilith seemed stronger. The immortal ignored Lex and looked towards Moon, who still lay in her hammock. Even now, she did not really have the energy to move too much. The immortal smiled, and took in a deep whiff. The air, it smelled so. Before the immortal could enjoy the prelude to his victory, Lex appeared in front of him and pushed his hand right into the immortal's chest. You have 13 tenets. No wait, 14 tenets. Don't you think that's too many? Lex asked. Moon smiled, and finally relaxed. It seemed like she had underestimated Lex. This is no joking matter. The Fugen have taken notice of the Saintess. One way or another, they will get their hands on her. This is not something someone at your level can resist. Before Moon could process what she heard, and once again start to get worried, Lex asked, remaining nonchalant, so like, the entire Fugen race? Or like some specific Fugen members? Like I said, names would really help. The immortal was frustrated to see that his attempt to intimidate Lex failed, but either way he never intended to let Lex leave alive. Even if he could not use laws, he could still use other attacks. A black, 3-pronged dagger appeared in his hand suddenly, which he stabbed into Lex's neck. Lex was too close, he didn't get an opportunity to dodge at all. With all his strength, as well as a special technique to increase the sharpness of the knife, the immortal cut Lex's neck, but nothing happened. The tip of the knife got stuck against the earliest signs of stubble Lex had just begun to show. Let alone skin, the knife could not even cut his not even fully grown facial hair. You know what, I'll just find out later. In truth, Lex had not really dropped his guard this entire time. He was fully ready to unleash his power and crush the immortal's tenets at a moment's notice, but it turned out he was just too strong even before his final seal was opened. Maybe he was a little too successful in his efforts to reach towards the strength of a heavenly immortal dragon during his cultivation the past few years. Chapter 11-19 basically just a butler. It actually made sense that Lex could so easily handle an immortal. His own strength was as such that he would immediately initiate the tribulation for the next realm if he hadn't kept his powers sealed. Thinking of it that way, what that meant was that he had already reached the power level of the next realm without actually entering the next realm. But even if he was at that level, destroying someone's tenets using brute force wasn't something Lex could achieve. Unwilling to keep this farce going on for much longer, Lex immediately used space warp. This was an ability he learned long ago which allowed him to bend space in a region as he wished, causing a massive spike in gravity. Considering the fact that he warped the space inside the immortal's soul, he finally managed to break his tenets. Since the immortal realm was entirely based on tenets, the immortal suddenly became mortal. He coughed out blood, and the skin on various parts of his body erupted as immortal energy escaped his body. Technically speaking, the man would still have a physical body and soul of a similar strength to that of an immortal's, but he just would not have his tenets. The chances of him returning to the immortal realm were close to nil, not that Lex was going to leave him with the opportunity. Lex pulled out the man's soul and used a sealing technique to imprison the soul inside a small gem. He'd question the man later. For now, it was best to focus on his sister's situation. Also, Lex reformed the glyph on his chest, once again sealing a part of his power. It was too risky to keep his powers unsealed. He did not want to enter the immortal realm until the perfect opportunity came by, and that would take some more time. The palace is empty because I sent everyone away. I didn't want to be surrounded by servants and guards all day. Besides, my body's not as weak as you may think. I mean, technically speaking, this planet is also my body. Instead of imprisoning my soul inside the planet, they fused most of it with the planet. That way, my purification ability, which constantly purifies my body, will also automatically purify the planet. Theoretically speaking, I can create a literal holy zone for cultivation this way. So technically, my body is very strong. It's just my original body that's become a little weak. But because the planet is so large, and my soul is so weak, the fusion is not complete yet. That's why. Lex put his hand on her mouth, preventing her from speaking. Stop talking. You think too much. Just a few years apart is all it took for you to think you can have opinions now. You're forgetting that as the youngest, you're basically just the family butler. I'm taking you away from here, and then we can sit and catch up, Lex said sternly. Even his expression looked admonishing, though considering his youthful face it was hard to take it seriously. Are you sure I'm the younger one of us right now? She asked, using her spirit sense, a hint of amusement in her voice. Lex's lip twitched, but he ignored her. There were two reasons he interrupted her. First was the revelation that her soul was actually fusing with the planet. Initially all he thought was that he would have to find a way to remove her soul from some kind of prison, but if there was a fusion process going on it might be much more complicated. Fortunately, the inn did not discriminate in what kind of body its guests had when they teleported over. He just had to find out if he could actually accept a planet as a guest. Secondly, he began to detect more spatial anomalies, and this time, they were much stronger. He could detect dozens of portals opening up just outside the planet's orbit, and his instincts were telling him he would not be able to deal with this situation as easily as he had with the single immortal. Mary, I have a new kind of guest I want to bring to the inn. Do you think a golden key would work on an entire planet, or would I have to use a few more? Chapter 11:20 No need to suppose. Mary scoffed. Of course it will only take one key. What do you take the midnight inn for? But, that will only work if the planet is sentient and uses the key. You cannot have a planet that's not sentient as a guest. Okay, new question. What if the planet is in the process of being made a clone, but it's not quite there yet? Can I still bring it? Even as Lex asked that question, he removed the seal on his chest once more and began moving his hands in an unusual pattern, as if he was preparing something. The situation was bad, but hopefully it wasn't to the point where he would need to open his third seal. This sit for updates. It was not just that opening the seal would cause him to face a tribulation to enter the next level, but that the tribulation would most likely come immediately. So either he would have to fight while undergoing the tribulation, or wait for it to end first. Either way, it was less than ideal. That complicates the situation a little bit. Why don't you tell me the exact situation and I'll look for a solution, Mary said, looking troubled. Lex explained the situation to her while continuing his odd movements. These strange, rhythmic movements of his limbs was something Lex came up with on his own while experimenting with his affinity. It was a tremendous help in doing something he wasn't technically supposed to be able to do. When the 13 portals opened and various figures stepped through, they discovered that the planet was actually outside their reach. 12 of them were Earth immortals, though they were drastically stronger than the one Lex had fought. The 13th, while still being just an Earth immortal, felt much stronger. Even all the way down on the planet, Lex could feel that the 13th one probably wasn't human. Unfortunately, Lex, since the cloning process isn't complete, the planet is just another object. Although guests can usually bring external objects with them, they cannot bring a planet with them, even if they own it. Damn it, fine. I'll figure out my own way, Lex cursed. He began to check if he could host a Bring Your Planet to the Inn event or something for planet owners, but the system seemed to be much more strict about bringing an entire planet, or basically any object that hosted a lot of life. Finding a loophole wasn't going to be so simple. How deeply are you connected to the planet? Lex asked. Are you connected to just a part of it, like the core or a continent, or the whole thing? Do you know if there's any way to reverse the process? Moon laughed. I am not connected to the planet, Lex. That's just a simple way of explaining the situation. A majority of my soul has been dissolved into the planet. If that happened to a normal person, they would just die. But, since I'm special, my soul will slowly assimilate the planet. It cannot be reversed, though if you made my soul about as strong as an immortal's, I suppose that would speed up the process. But I suppose. No need to suppose, Lex interrupted her once more. Strengthening your soul to the level of an immortal sounds good enough. I have a friend who is good with souls. By the way, would you happen to know the grade of the highest quality spirit stone mine on this planet? Chapter 1121 Everything is going to be fine. Highest quality spirit stone mine? Yeah, I suppose, replied Moon, and tried to bring up a map, but none of her technology was working. She blushed, but pretended like she wasn't bothered by it. I can't pull up a map, but I can tell you where it is, she said. Excellent. Actually, just to be safe, how about you tell me the location of the top 4 spirit stone mines? You can just tell me their approximate distance and direction from where we are. I'll find them on my own, Lex said. He did not seem like he was in a rush, even though 13 immortals were attacking the space bubble outside the planet. It would take them at least a few minutes to crack it, or find ways around it. That's if they were exceptionally strong. Otherwise, he had at least half an hour. That was more than enough time. Moon, suppressing her confusion, gave Lex the directions he required before he just disappeared. One moment he was right in front of her, and the next he was gone. Moon once again felt the connection between her and the formation that was supposed to protect her, but couldn't detect anything. So much for keeping her safe by hiding her on one planet and making sure she never goes anywhere else. All it had done was make her a sitting target. She tried to muster up some anger, but all such emotions had left her long ago. She sighed, and her thoughts drifted towards her other siblings. All of them were in messed up situations one way or another. But before she could dwell on it too much, Lex reappeared. This time, he was wearing a smile and looked satisfied. Hey Moon, want to go on a trip? He asked. But instead of waiting for a reply, he held her hand and covered her body with his energy, making sure that it had support and wouldn't be hurt. What am I saying? Of course you want to go on a trip, but before that, let's see off your guests. No need to be rude. He would have teleported both of them to the edge of the space bubble, but he didn't want to risk bringing her too far from the surface of the planet, so instead he opened a small portal that opened right at the edge of the bubble. Through it, they could see out into space. More importantly, they were brought face to face with one of the guys trying to break through the space bubble. To Lex, the man was just another guy he would probably thoroughly thrash sometime in the future, but the guy clearly recognized Lex, and placed great importance on him. Without waiting for the immortal to respond, Lex closed the portal. Let's get out of here. By the way, I'm going to have to drain your planet's spirit stones just a bit. But I'll return them later, so don't worry. With that said, Lex activated the formation he had laid around the planet. It was not the best he could do, not even close, but considering the time constraints they were under it was pretty decent. The formation around the planet was an incomplete teleportation formation, anchored into the planet itself. Another reason he had created the bubble around the planet was to preserve the atmosphere around the planet once he teleports it away. Unfortunately, even Lex could not casually teleport the planet anywhere he wished. But teleporting it away to a random location would make it impossible for others to follow or find them in a short period of time. That would be enough time for Lex to figure out how to take Yildirim Utopia back to the Midnight Realm. The formation had been built using exceptionally rare materials he brought out from the Midnight Realm, and it would be powered by the planet's own spirit stone reserves, so it shouldn't be too much of a drain on Lex. Hypothetically. In theory. At least, according to all his studies. He hadn't really had time to verify his knowledge since he acquired it. Lex, why do I have a bad feeling about this? What are you doing? Moon asked hesitantly. I'm not doing anything dangerous, relax. Everything is going to be fine. There's nothing to worry about. He activated the formation, and the planet began to tremble. Does this count as you getting a body massage? Lex asked as he looked at the quaking ground. Before Moon could respond, the entire planet disappeared. Chapter 1122 Realistic Dream. Since the Henali portal had stopped operating, in part due to many AI that had joined the Fugan, and in part due to the destruction of countless connector planets, which basically acted as servers for the portal, the vast universe had once again become disconnected. Besides a few major forces, which had their own independent means to communicate information across their territories, most places became isolated. As a result, the hold of larger forces over their territories diminished. Star systems became more independent, which was both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on where one was. But even so, there were still a few ways to transmit critically important information across the realm. The news may not reach every corner of the realm, but at least all significant planets and forces would get it. For a while now, such means had only been used by the Henali to promote their numerous victories across the realm, as well as emphasize the upcoming tourney. But, for the first time, a different piece of news spread across the realm. To be specific, it was just 3 sentences, since the means to spread news across the realm was not easy nor cheap. Lex the Dragonslayer had returned. He challenged the whole realm to face him in the Champions tourney, especially dragons. He then proceeded to kidnap a planet. The credibility of this news was questionable, especially since no one knew where it came from and who spread it. But the vast majority of people did not care about credibility. They only cared about gossip, and there was plenty of that. Per second, trillions of fan-fiction novels were being printed, all focused on Lex the Dragonslayer, taking on the universe. He was the underdog challenger, facing both the Henali and Fugan, as well as dragons. He was the underappreciated heartthrob, and he was the evil villain bent on destroying all life. He was fighting to save his sweetheart, and he was fighting for vengeance against those who had wronged him. The stories about him were endless, but even the countless stories being printed about him each and every passing second failed to accurately judge his current predicament. Lex looked at his sister, and then back at the sky. He still did not speak. Moon laughed as she began to actually convince herself that she was dreaming. Of course it's a dream. How else could you teleport an entire planet away? You're not even an immortal. It's ridiculous. Compared to all of that, watching a massive planet eat a star right in front of our eyes is actually a little believable. She continued to laugh, expecting to wake up any moment. She looked left and right, wondering what other absurd things she would see in this dream. That's not a planet, Lex finally said, looking up at the sky. Of course he knew what that was. He had been studying the past 15 years exactly so that he would not be caught lacking in knowledge, which is why he completely and thoroughly understood how screwed he really was. That, little sister, is called a world eater, although that name does not do it justice since it ate an entire star. It also has another name that you might be familiar with. The smile on Moon's face began to tighten. She wanted to believe this was all a dream, so why did it feel so real? Lifting her hand, which took quite a bit of energy, she poked Lex to see if he was real. In recent years, it has more recently been referred to as a Jorlum egg. It's the thing that gives birth to a Jorlum once it hatches. Moon poked Lex again and watched as his skin softly bent under her touch. This was such a realistic dream. It had to be. Of course, there's no need to worry. It just ate, so chances are high that it's not interested in our tiny little planet. What Moon could not see, because of her low level, was the dark entity moving against the backdrop of the empty space behind the World Eater. Or rather, entities. Each one was so big that Lex could not actually conceptualize how large it was. Perhaps the entire Midnight Realm might not be big enough to fit one of those creatures. Chapter 1123 Best Bet. Mary, I have a general information question for you, Lex asked as his gaze was stuck up into the dark sky. What is the cultivation level of a Jorlum? Just, generally speaking. Across the whole universe, as a species, I'd say they're in the top 10, which is saying something considering they have no real allies and literally everyone just does their best to kill them as soon as they are discovered. The problem is they have no cultivation levels, just maturity levels. That means all they need to do to become Tao Lords is eat and grow up. I don't think there is any other race in the entire universe that has destroyed more realms than the Jorlum, all because they literally just ate the whole realm. It was difficult to be sure, considering the scale of their bodies was something he was still trying to comprehend, but Lex felt like he counted at least 3 Jorlum besides the World Eater. Good to know, good to know. Anything else interesting about them? They're probably not into friendship bracelets, right? Lex asked as he began to pull out various items from his spatial bangle. This was exactly why he liked being locked up in the Midnight Realm. Lex began to suspect that his real affinity was not for laws, but for attracting ridiculously powerful beings. Friendship bracelets? No, why would you, Lex? Lex, have you run into a Jorlum? Mary asked, even as her holographic avatar appeared on his shoulder. But since this was outside the inn, she could not gain a lot of information. At most, her sight was similar to that of a mortal. No, not a Jorlum. More like 3 or 4 of them and a World Eater. Lex summoned an entire tank containing spirit elixir, which contained a lot more energy than spirit stones, followed by numerous void stones and space crystals. Lex, if you're trying to teleport away, don't, Mary suddenly said. You cannot compete with them when it comes to laws. If you try to teleport away, you will only attract their attention and chances are they'll stop you. Your best bet is to camouflage the energy readings of the planet and hope they ignore you. Best bet? I wouldn't say so. A hint of madness flashed in Lex's eyes. Lex didn't even need his screaming instincts to know that it would be the turn of the planet he was on. He planned on availing the turtle's help, hoping that it could somehow command the World Eater away. It was a foolish plan, but it was the best bet he currently had. Unfortunately, Yildirim Utopia had not yet been linked to the system, so he could not teleport others to it yet. Fortunately, he had already thought of a way around this conundrum. So Moon, while we wait, why don't you catch me up on everything? How did you end up on this planet? When did your soul get fused with it? That sort of thing. Moon looked at her brother and couldn't decide whether the situation was hilarious or horrific. Is this really the time for that, Lex? I don't think your formation will hide us from the World Eater. Why don't you try teleporting the planet again? There are more spirit stone mines. Oh, I'll try teleportation if it comes to that, Lex said. But I think that might not work out so well for us. But don't you worry, I have other plans. We're perfectly safe. Everything's fine. Moon could not help but look at Lex oddly. A part of her still thought she was dreaming, and another part of her still thought that if the worst happened, Lex could still escape to the inn. Then how about we calm the people of the planet down, she said, unwilling to broach the topic of her imprisonment? They're probably extremely worried and confused. Yeah, I suppose that's something we should do, Lex said. Make sure no one does anything drastic. Chapter 1124 Not Good. Moving the tavern from one world to another was always a bit of a hassle, since all his existing guests had to check out, lest they wake up in a new world. Fortunately, it was very easy for Lex to just plant an idea into their heads prompting them to leave the tavern for whatever reason. The only good thing was that moving the tavern from planet to planet was very easy, so he could return to Azula any time he wanted, which he planned on doing soon. He was not yet done with the saga of the Huntress, the Alchemist and the few others he had been guiding. The tavern was also mostly hassle-free. It was like a hitchhiker, jumping from planet to planet as it desired, and all he really needed to go to a specific planet rather than a random one was an item belonging to that planet. Since he himself was literally standing on Yildirim Utopia, that was particularly easy. So even though the planet was not connected to the inn yet, the tavern showed up. Now, since the tavern was already on the planet, he could easily send any worker he desired from the inn to work at the tavern. That, naturally, included the galactic sovereign turtle. Using remote presence, he appeared in front of the turtle as the innkeeper. Over the past 15 years the turtle had naturally grown larger and stronger, even if it had not really grown up mentally much. The number of random pets it had adopted had reached dozens, though Little Blue, who was now a little older and even more mischievous, clearly and openly declared itself the first, and therefore favorite, child. But besides that, there was not much change. He supposed it made sense. To a being that had lived for over 2,000 years, a mere 15 years was not a long time, and thus did not elicit much change. For Lex that was a good thing. "Do you remember Lex?" he asked, appearing nonchalant. Oh dear, how could I forget him? He is the little human who keeps eating everything I grow. Just because it has berry in its name does not mean it's meant to be eaten. But he is in his growing age. I suppose it is to be expected. Lex and Moon teleported over, and though it was dark, they had no problem in finding the turtle. "This is my friend I was telling you about. Turtle, this is my sister, Moon. I'd love for you two to get to know one another, but first how about we deal with the small issue we're facing?" It had been, perhaps a couple of minutes for the tavern to appear over and for Lex to send the turtle here, yet the World Eater had already gobbled up another planet. Why was that thing so damn fast? Lex had imagined that something so large would be incredibly slow. Lex brought the turtle back to Moon's palace, just in time for it to see the World Eater turning towards their planet. It seemed that the formations he had used really didn't work. "You think you could talk to that big guy up there?" Lex asked, pointing towards the sky. He did not need to be accurate, for as the World Eater came closer, it took up more and more of the entire sky. Oh dear, the child is hurt. No wonder he is so anxious. But injury is no excuse for a poor diet. Let me talk to it. The turtle began extending some green vines that emerged from its shell towards the sky. But as they rose up into the air, they began to dissipate, turning instead into sparking fragments that flew towards the World Eater. Oh dear, that's not good. Chapter 11:25 Horse and Carriage. Moon could not help but look towards the massive turtle that had just teleported onto the planet. Despite its size, it somehow looked cute and the way it talked was just adorable. Despite the gravity of the situation, she could not help but admit that she was having fun. She turned towards Lex and poked him in the cheek once more. He had been ignoring all her pokes, not that she could blame him for it. But the fact that he was here, in front of her, in person, was the greatest. It was also why she kept thinking this was a dream. Although she had met her siblings and even her parents through her clones, it was not the same as meeting them in person. Not to mention that since the Henali portal was disrupted, she could no longer maintain a connection to her clones which were countless light years away. So it was nice to have pleasant company once more. Funnily enough, Lex's young appearance actually reminded her of older times, when everything was better. It was why she never even questioned why he looked this way. "What's wrong?" Lex asked the turtle. "There seems to be a fight going on in the distance," the turtle said. "This little egg was injured during the fight, which is why he is in such a rush to feed." Lex looked back up at the night sky, but could not make out anything, not in the least because the World Eater now took up a large portion of the sky. In the distance he could see the Jorlim, but he could not even tell if what he was looking at was their body, face, limb or anything else. There was no way for him to detect what was happening. If there was a fight, it was too far for him to sense in any way. "Can you calm the egg down and stop it from eating this planet?" Lex asked, perfectly hiding his anxiety. It was as if the result made no difference to him at all. "It is just an egg. It has not been born yet. Everything it is doing is based on its instincts. I just need to calm it down and it will react accordingly." Honestly, who treats a baby like this? Lex did not respond, lest he mention that this baby just ate a star for a snack. Or that it was twice the size of a star. Or that it was currently on its way to eat them. What's the situation? He asked the turtle, considering that the world eater was still coming closer, and had not slowed down at all. The fight in the distance is dangerous. I instructed the egg to protect this world, and to bring it away from this place. As if to confirm exactly what the turtle said, white clouds emerged from around the world eater and approached the planet. The clouds wrapped themselves around the planet, like a leash, and then the world eater began to drag the planet behind it. It was surreal. Even Lex was stunned. But of everyone who saw the situation, he recovered the quickest. So, now that the situation is under control, why don't we find someplace nice to talk? I know you are worried about the people on your planet, but a single message sent to them through spirit sense will be enough to calm them down. How exactly did you end up like this? And who did this to you? While Lex questioned the deflective little moon, in the distance the Jorlum continued their fight. Lex could not imagine what the monstrously large beings could even be fighting if not each other. But that was because he did not yet understand the limits of power mortals wielded. After attaining a certain level of power, the size of the enemy no longer mattered. Of course, the Jorlum were strong besides just their massive size. The World Eater is being kidnapped, a Henali warrior yelled, one of his many eyes locked onto the planet that had tied up the World Eater like a horse to pull a carriage. Who is it? Another yelled angrily. I can see him. It's Lex the Dragonslayer. The rumors are true. He has returned, and this time he is kidnapping a World Eater. Damn it, we can't let him get away. But try as they might, even the celestial Henali soldiers were unable to break free of the Jorlum. This was not a fight that would end easily, nor would it end any time soon. Chapter 1126. Stop changing the topic. Lex and Moon sat together on the roof of her white palace, looking up at the World Eater, pulling their planet forward like a horse pulling forward a chariot. Even pulling the planet behind it, the World Eater moved at unbelievable speeds. They were already far away from the Jorlum so that they were no longer visible. It had also replaced the space bubble Lex put around the planet with a force field of its own. This way, the planet and its residents were not affected by the speed at which they were moving, and the planet continued to remain safe. A majority of the residents of the planet were not in good shape, though that was predictable. It's not every day that their planet is kidnapped and then dragged through space. But the emergency response forces on this planet were truly well trained, and were preventing the situation from deteriorating too quickly. Lex would get around to helping them, but first he was focused on his sister. She was very hesitant about recalling the past, but ultimately realized that it could not be avoided. But even then, she had not spoken yet. So the two of them just sat together in silence, and allowed their thoughts to wander. You look sad, Moon said, as she poked Lex once more in the cheek. A little, but you wouldn't understand why, Lex said. Try me. You know, I'm not exactly a little girl anymore. Lex smiled weakly. How do I explain this? Well, I've been gone from the origin realm for a while. For my return, I'd planned this huge event that would make me famous overnight. Not that I was planning on becoming famous. I just had to plan this major event that would have shocked a lot of people. But now, after all that planning, I think the impact of kidnapping a planet and acquiring a World Eater will end up beating anything I had planned. Just feels like I wasted a lot of time. Moon giggled. He was upset because he accidentally became more famous than he could have on purpose. These are the kinds of problems she also wished she had. But maybe, these were not the only problems he had, just the ones he was sharing. It was a little strange. Meeting after all these years, they should have felt awkward or distant. But instead, they immediately returned to how they were with one another when they were kids. Considering the age gap between Moon and Lex, they shouldn't really have been friends growing up. Yet they were. Now it's your turn, he said, looking at little Moon. Technically speaking, Moon had not been her original name. But as a little girl she had been particularly enamored by the moon, buying every toy, poster, and piece of merchandise she could find. One time she got the moon painted on her face during some kid's birthday party, and since then everyone had started calling her Little Moon. The name had stuck. Thinking back to those times, Lex felt a little sad. Life was so different back then. How had they gone from that to this? Moon looked at him with hesitation, but Lex met her gaze. Eventually, she sighed. Actually, I shouldn't be the one telling you this, but I suppose at the same time, it fits that I am the one to tell you. Moon sighed, and lifted her frail arm to grab the cup Lex had given her. It contained some liquid Lex gave her, which was supposed to strengthen her. She had been drinking such stuff. Plague came and they needed her help. That's when Dad and Mom met, and apparently Dad really liked her fighting spirit, so he taught her a form of body cultivation. But Mom had an inquisitive mind, so while she cultivated, she also studied cultivation, and how and why it affected the body. At least, that's what Belle told me. I'm pretty sure there's more to it, because apparently over the years Mom became so knowledgeable about cultivation that she convinced Dad that he had cultivated incorrectly. He restarted his cultivation from scratch under her supervision. That's when the problems began. Moon scratched her face and looked at Lex. Even now she was postponing, but with how unreactive Lex was being, she had no option but to continue explaining. Apparently, Mom learned a lot about unique physiques as well, and thought of a way she could nurture them. When Belle was born, Mom was able to prove her theory correct. Belle was born with a strange physique that was especially compatible with divine energy, which is what angels use. So Dad got her some angel blood, hoping she could absorb some energy from it. Instead, she gained a bloodline that mimicked an angel's powers. That attracted grandfather's attention. Chapter 1127 Filial Grandson. Lex pursed his lips, but said nothing. Belle? An angel? He'd have been less surprised if he learned that she was a literal demon than hearing that Dad had a fight with grandfather, who was already angry at him for restarting his cultivation, and even more angry at him for marrying Mom. Grandpa said he'd come back and take Belle with him, to replace the loss Dad inflicted on the family for giving up his cultivation. Around that time, Mom was already expecting you. Afraid that grandfather might also want to take you away, they started to think of ways to hide you from him. But when you were born, your physique was a lot more special than Mom and Dad expected. Belle didn't tell me what it was, but apparently Mom and Dad were so scared of finding out that Dad overexerted himself, nearly crippling his sword intent while trying to put inscriptions on you that would hide your physique. It worked, but as a result Dad became extremely weak once more. Upstati from. Around that time, apparently grandfather sent a message to Dad that if he could regain even half of what his strength used to be, he'd let him come back to the family. According to Belle, though, it was mostly because grandfather felt like she might be able to replace Dad and follow in grandfather's footsteps of being able to take on the family head position. Even though at that point she was too young to cultivate, the potential of her physique could not be hidden. So, as a result, our parents calmed down a bit. After Liz was born. She also had a physique, and apparently it was great, though not as good as yours. She even got an invitation from a school called Primaventura. Apparently it's the best cultivation academy in the universe or something. Even Belle didn't get into Primaventura, and had to go to a lower level one. Grandfather was very happy about all of that, though he still didn't know about you. Mom and Dad still kept everything about you hidden. They were too afraid to let people find out about you. But things were fine. Mom and Dad decided to keep you away from the cultivation world until they were strong enough to protect you themselves. Everything was getting better. Even Dad was recovering well. Then, I was born. Moon sighed, and for a long time didn't speak. She just looked down at her hands that held the cup containing the wonderful juice, and Lex didn't pressure her. It felt a little bitter learning about everything that had actually happened. It felt extremely bitter knowing that his parents had been trying to protect him all this while he thought they abandoned him. "I heard you need an evacuation," the projection said. "Yes. My filial grandson returned and kidnapped the vessel I had prepared for Her Majesty. I think my ancestor might kill me to appease him. I can no longer hold this position. It's too risky. This would be the third time your grandson has interfered with our plans. I feel like his future might not be so great once the regent hears about this. Jeffrey, I don't have time for this. Arrange the evacuation. I've already initiated all the plans leading up to my departure. The Jotun Empire will have their hands full, even more than they already were. Well, you did get me off Earth in a timely manner. I suppose I should return the favor. I'll send someone over momentarily. Also, you didn't comment on your stance about your grandson. Someone has to be punished for this. Kill him. Kill all of them for all I care. That stupid son of mine and his family have been a pain in my neck for far too long, anyway. And to think, I had such high hopes for them." A few moments later, a portal opened up right next to Damien, and he stepped through it. A few minutes after he exited, an explosion rocked the entire building he used to live in. As if setting off a chain, various other places around the planet began to explode. While everyone tried to understand what was happening, a number of minor realms burst open, and a horde of insects invaded, most of them at the peak of the nascent realm. The ones that weren't at the peak were already immortals. Chapter 1128 Sandwich so good, it can make you fly. Lex kept his gaze steady, not letting his emotions show on his face. It was a surreal experience, listening to someone tell him about the events in his own life. Even though he was there for each event, he had no idea that any of it was happening. Everything had happened right in front of him, yet he never knew. Not that he took any blame for it, or allowed himself to feel guilty. He was a kid, and a mortal besides. There was no way he could have seen through all the deception. But still, it made him question if all his good memories were even real. When had his sisters been replaced with clones? He didn't even know. Going off to college and being away from his family must have made it easy for them to be replaced. Spending years away in New York while they were supposed to be in London also probably made it easy for them to do whatever they wished. But Lex had always thought that he had decided to go off to college far away because he was going through his own phase of wanting personal space and creating his own life. But now, for all he knew, that was something his parents could have engineered without him ever knowing. It was the kind of shadow puppeting he was always afraid the system would do to him. Maybe on a subconscious level he always knew it was happening, which is why he was also afraid of the system doing it to him. He didn't want to live through another lie. But right now, this moment was not about him. It was about Moon. He observed his little sister as she displayed guilt on her face, as if her birth itself ruined the lives of her family. Yet as much as he wanted to console her, he also did not want to interrupt her, as he knew how hard it was for her to speak about this. "I'm not sure what exactly happened," she continued. "Belle told me that Dad tried to hide me the same way he hid you, that he tried to use the same inscriptions. But my body is different. No matter what they did, my body would just return to its normal. The inscriptions would fade. I could not be hidden, and no one knew how to stop it. Mom and Dad assumed that if Dad was stronger he might have been able to use inscriptions that could work, but with him restarting his cultivation, and then being weakened again after hiding you, the little progress he made was already remarkable. Then Grandfather came, and he instantly saw that there was something special about me. But the thing was, no one knew what my physique actually did. They just knew it was very special. Even before cultivating, I could absorb spiritual energy, and change it into something that could heal souls, so everyone thought that my physique had to do with souls. While we were trying to figure it out, someone in our family apparently underwent the tribulations to become immortal, but barely survived. His soul was damaged beyond repair, and was on the verge of dying despite surviving the tribulations. Apparently I was able to save him. I don't really remember, I was too young. After that, Grandfather became obsessed. He said that with my physique our family could produce hundreds of Earth immortals, and maybe even heaven immortals. My powers were too valuable. That's when he took me away, and started doing tests on me to figure out what my physique was. He drew blood and took countless tissue samples, but couldn't figure it out. But what we did learn as a result was that no matter how badly I'm hurt, as long as I'm alive, I'll recover in a few hours at most. Not to mention, even my blood could heal soul injuries. Something like that had never been seen. Instead, he produced a small fruit he found in the Midnight Realm. It looked like a lychee, which was a fruit he recalled Moon used to love. Here, try this, he said, peeling the prickly skin of the fruit. What about my story made you think I was hungry? She asked, laughing. But she took the fruit from him and plopped it in her mouth. Then her expression morphed into shock as she was overwhelmed by its amazing flavor. There was also the fact that it instantly spread warmth through her body and filled her with strength that even the juice had failed to deliver, but she was mostly focused on the flavor. What is that? How can it be so good? It's just a random fruit. Here, try this, Lex said, pulling out a sandwich. This sandwich was the culmination of 15 years of Kenta's training. It was actually good enough for Lex to have ordered a few to take along with him. Moon, no longer hesitating, grabbed the sandwich from his hand and bit into it. Despite how it looked, the sandwich was incredibly soft, and she easily broke off. A surge of energy filled her body and before Moon knew it she was floating. Ah! What's happening? She screamed, alarmed. The sandwich is so good it can make you fly, Lex said with a smirk. Or at least that's what the cook said. In actuality, one of the ingredients is a plant that has odd effects on gravity. Come on, finish up the sandwich and then give me a tour of your planet. I bet you haven't given anyone a flying tour before. Well, at least one where you are flying yourself. Lex stepped into the air as well, and accompanied his sister who was suddenly excited at the sudden ability to fly. He did not let her sense his seething anger at all, and instead kept the mood light, and talked of other things. Since Moon herself was keen on avoiding this topic, it was easy enough. But soon, very soon, Lex would let a lot of people feel his anger in great detail. Chapter 1129 Stupid, Unknown Warbringer. The acolyte woke up covered in cold sweats, his mind aflutter with the memories of what he just dreamed, trying to hold on to them as they slipped from memory. He saw a sword, deadly beyond measure. He saw a dragon king that was not a dragon. He saw a war between worlds, not between races that lived on those worlds, but two actual worlds themselves. He saw a rain of lightning. He saw chaos and confusion. He saw things he could not understand, and he saw things he could not have imagined, and amidst it all, he saw a wooden tavern that provided excellent room service. For a few moments the acolyte tried to recall what connected all these flashes in his dreams, but the thoughts slipped from his mind. He could not remember. The acolyte sighed, and then removed himself from the warm embrace of his blanket. He wanted to go wash up since his whole body was sticky with sweat. But he only took a few steps before he paused, and something attracted his attention. In a notebook beside his bed, he had entered a few scribbles. He didn't recall doing that, so it must have been during his sleep. He picked up the red, leather notebook and read the lines that were barely legible. The time is nigh. The Warbringer is going to war. The acolyte groaned and put the book down. Ever since this accursed Warbringer came into his life, he had not been able to divine for another person at all. It was as if all his divination skills were thoroughly pointed only towards this Warbringer. That could have been a great opportunity if he knew who the Warbringer was and actually became his dedicated diviner. But since he didn't, there wasn't much he could do. The acolyte left the room, unaware that in his drowsy state he ignored the smudges in front of the two sentences that had been written. It was as if something had been erased. After they were done with the village, Moon took him to the district capital, from where she ruled over the planet. Even though the sun was gone, everything was still functioning, so from the capital she reassured her people that they were still safe, and that things would soon return to normal. But at that point, she started to get drowsy once more, so Lex teleported her back to her palace so she could get back in her hammock. Even then, Moon talked with Lex until she eventually dozed off. Lex did not leave once she was sleeping. Instead, he laid back and thought about various things. Moon had hinted at the fact that both Belle and Liz weren't exactly having the time of their lives either. He hadn't asked yet, but he'd need to ask sooner or later. Once this planet was linked to the inn, Lex would be able to teleport freely so he could go find a way for Moon to bring the planet with her where she went. It sounded like an absurd thing to say, but Lex had seen enough absurdity to know that anything was possible. He also needed to find ways to increase her cultivation level. The reason why she was so frail was because of the level difference between her and the planet, but if she was able to reach the immortal realm, fusing with a planet would not be tough at all. Not to mention, Moon told him that due to her unique physique, she did not need to worry about having a poor foundation. No matter how she cultivated, her physique would optimize her condition on its own. Basically, she was on the best cultivation path she could ever actually walk, so even if he took some drastic measures, the results would ultimately be optimal. He had to do all of this soon, as the preliminaries for the Champions tourney were about to begin. Originally there were supposed to be 4 more years, Origin Realm time, till that happened. But the timeline had been brought forward after the discovery of the Jorlum for some reason. Lex could participate through the token given to himself, as well as through the one the Innkeeper had gotten. But since he did not want to bring the Innkeeper to light these days, he'd use his own token. After all, in his years of operating the tavern, he'd learned a lot about the tourney, and it was there that he would find the perfect opportunity to become an immortal. Chapter 11:30 Noir Aesthetic. God damn it, this is not what adventures are supposed to be like, Jack grumbled as he pushed away the countless paparazzi. Tiny Sparkles, the unicorn suffering from dwarfism and the Jolly Rancher's first mate, snorted in agreement, though its snort sounded like crystal bells ringing, and glitter flew out of its nose. Its clear dissatisfaction was lost on the paparazzi, though, who could not get enough of the sparkling tiny horse and kept taking photographs with their old-school cameras. No good deed goes unpunished, Captain, said Ollie, who was seething with jealousy over the attention the unicorn was getting. The crystal alligator, though, was just looking around curiously. It did not understand what was happening. There was a giant gorilla monster hanging from the building swatting down planes, Jack said. What was I supposed to do? Ignore it? You know I love aerial dogfights with the Jolly Rancher. It was just one stupid monster fight. How we went from there to having Tiny Sparkles become the brand ambassador for world peace is completely beyond me. All around them were orcs, massive and dark and, stated politely, not the best-looking creatures Jack had ever seen. Like them, everything in this world was dark and colorless and beautiful on the inside, but definitely not on the outside. Whatever world they ended up in, for some reason, was monochrome. Even Jack, his ship and the rest had also been affected by the strange noir aesthetic, and only Tiny Sparkles remained unaffected. Captain, permission to hasten our journey? Ollie requested as it spread its wings. T/'s chapter is updated by. No, Ollie, you cannot blow away everyone on the street. We're the good guys. Well, at least for now. Plus we still haven't figured out what that stupid tower wanted us to do. Once all of them had been teleported, Jack saw a tower he knew too well. It was the Tower of Providence. But unlike his previous experience, he got no guidance this time in his objective. He was just told that a realm needed his help, and was sent over. Fighting off the giant gorilla Kong Kong would have been too easy a task, but one could hope. Unfortunately, it had not panned out. Since then, Jack and the rest had been trying to explore the realm and see how they could help it. Somehow, in the process, they became known as heroes, and Tiny Sparkles particularly became beloved across the land. Maybe. Depends on who's asking. Someone with money, Jack responded, and flung a small coin purse towards the orc, who caught it midair. The soft jingle of coins clinking against each other sounded as he shook the purse before slipping it in his pocket. In that case, I am Mr. Holmes. How can I help you? I have it on good authority that a major catastrophe is about to strike, but I don't know what it is. Can you find out what it is? Do you have any clues about it? Can you tell me who gave you this information? I have no clues, and it doesn't matter who gave me this information. You just have to treat it as if it's real, and tell me if you can find out anything. Without any clues, it'll be tough to find the right direction for investigation, he admitted directly. Instead of responding, Jack threw him another coin purse. This time, Holmes smiled and threw his cigarette on the floor and crushed it beneath his feet. Come back here tomorrow at the same time. You'll have what you want. The orc tipped his bowler hat, and then disappeared into the darkness. Or well, he tried. Since Ollie had a high affinity for shadow, it saw clearly the orc tiptoeing in the shadows, careful not to be seen by anyone as he left. The rest did not need to see him, for the smell of his cigarette still hung on his clothes, which meant it was easy to detect him. Are we really going to rely on him? Tiny Sparkles asked. Of course not. We have about 99 more detectives to hire. Let's go.